The crash of the glass was a gunshot in the polite ballroom. It shattered against the marble floor, a spray of crystal and spilled champagne that made a woman in pearls gasp. Then came the voice, sharp and ugly, slicing through the murmur of the charity gala. "Pick it up." I turned. Isabella Moretti, draped in a blood-red dress that clung to her like a second skin, was pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the floor, then at me. Her face was a mask of furious privilege. "You heard me," she snapped, her voice rising. "Pick up that glass." I stood frozen in my dark green gown, alone from a friend for this hospital fundraiser. I was a doctor, a surgical resident, not a waitress. The room had gone quiet, 100 pairs of eyes turning to watch the spectacle. This was the world I thought I understood. Wealthy donors, polite conversation, and bad canapes. A place of rules and decorum. But Isabella's eyes were wild, unhinged by something more than champagne. She saw my dress, my youth, and assumed I was staff. It was a simple mistake, easily corrected. I opened my mouth to explain, to calmly state my name and position. However, before I could speak, a man moved from the shadows at the edge of the room. He did not rush. He moved with a heavy, deliberate calm that seemed to suck the air out of the space around him. Lorenzo Moretti, Isabella's husband. I had only seen him in pictures, a name whispered in the hospital's donor wing with a mixture of fear and reverence. The man whose money built the entire cardiac floor. He stopped beside his wife. He did not look at the broken glass. He did not look at me. He looked only at her. "Isabella," he said. His voice was quiet, a low rumble of gravel and ice. It was not a plea. It was a command. She faltered, the fury in her eyes flickering. She bumped into me low. "She needs to clean up her mess." He finally turned his gaze to me. His eyes were the color of dark coffee, and they held no warmth, no apology. They were analytical, assessing. He took in my dress, the slight tremor in my hands I was trying to conceal, the defiance hardening my jaw. He saw everything. Then he looked back at his wife. "Go to the car," he said. The words were so soft, I almost did not hear them. But they landed on Isabella like a physical blow. The color drained from her face, replaced by a waxy pallor. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her red dress a smear of color vanishing through the arched doorway. The silence she left behind was absolute. Lorenzo Moretti stood there for a moment, a statue carved from granite and tailored wool. A waiter scurried forward with a dustpan, his movements jerky and nervous. Lorenzo raised a single hand, and the boy froze. He turned his full attention back to me. The weight of it was physical, a pressure against my chest. He took a step closer, his shoes making no sound on the marble. The scent of cedar and something cold, like winter air, clung to him. "Dr. Reed," he said. "My name." He knew my name. I apologized for my wife's behavior. "She is unwell." The lie was so blatant, so smooth, it was its own kind of threat. We both knew Isabella was not unwell. She was cruel, and he was the man who held her leash. "It's forgotten," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted. I just wanted to leave, to melt back into the crowd, and forget this moment ever happened. "No," he said, his gaze unwavering. "It is not." He gestured to the broken glass, which the waiter was now frantically sweeping away. "A debt has been created tonight. And in my world, all debts are paid." That was the moment the floor of the gala fell away, revealing something dark and cold beneath. I was no longer a guest at a fundraiser. I was a name on a ledger, an unknown variable in an equation I could not begin to understand. I had done nothing but stand in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now the most dangerous man in the city had decided I was owed something. I had a feeling the payment would cost me far more than a moment of public humiliation. For 3 days, I tried to convince myself I had imagined it. The intensity in his eyes, the possessive weight in his words. I threw myself into my work, into the sanitized chaos of the emergency room. 20-hour shifts, the steady rhythm of beeping machines, the smell of antiseptic. This was my world. A world of science and procedure, where problems had solutions you could find in a textbook. There were no hidden ledgers here, no unpaid debts. I was leaving the hospital late on a Wednesday night, the city air thick with the promise of rain. I was exhausted, my muscles aching, my brain buzzing with the day's cases. I barely noticed the black sedan idling at the curb until it was right in front of me. The passenger door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped out. He was built like a refrigerator, with a face that looked like it had been used to stop pucks. "Dr. Reed," he said. It was not a question. "Mr. Moretti would like to see you." My blood went cold. "I'm sorry. I have to get home." It was not a request, he said, his voice flat and empty of emotion. He simply stood there, holding the door open, a patient and immovable object. I could scream. I could run. But I looked down the quiet, rain-slicked street and knew it would be useless. This was the payment. This was the debt being called in. My mind raced through every possible scenario as the car sliced silently through the city. Blackmail? A threat? Had I witnessed something I should not have? But there was nothing. Only a broken glass and a brief, humiliating exchange. It made no sense. The car bypassed the glittering towers of Manhattan and headed for a part of Long Island I had only seen in movies, where iron gates taller than I was guarded sprawling stone mansions. We pulled up to one such estate. The house was a fortress of dark stone and ivy, beautiful and menacing in the moonlight. The man led me inside, through a foyer with a soaring ceiling and floors so polished they looked like black water. I was taken to a study. Bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes that looked like they had never been read. Lorenzo Moretti was standing by a fireplace, though no fire was lit. He was dressed in a simple black sweater and dark trousers, but he looked more formidable than he had in his tuxedo. He dismissed the large man with a nod, and we were alone. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. "Thank you for coming, doctor," he said, turning to face me. I was not given a choice. A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, crossed his face, gone as quickly as it came. "Choice is a luxury. I have a professional matter to discuss with you." He gestured to a chair, but I remained standing. "I don't understand. What could you possibly need from me?" "I need a doctor," he said simply. "One who is not on anyone's payroll. One with no allegiances. One who values discretion." He paused, his eyes pinning me in place. "My father is unwell. He requires constant, private medical supervision. The doctors we have used, their loyalty is questionable." I stared at him, trying to process the words. This was not a threat. It was a job offer. A summons. "Your father? The hospital has the best specialists in the country. He would get far better care there." "My father cannot be in a hospital," he said, and the finality in his tone told me this was not up for debate.
"He is a private man.
His condition must remain a private matter. Any sign of weakness in my family is an invitation for our enemies to move." Family. Enemies. He said the words as if he were discussing corporate competitors. But I knew what he meant. The Falcones. The Gravanos. Names I had heard on the news linked to violence and crime. This was not a family business. It was an empire built on fear. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You could hire any private doctor in the country. I have vetted you, Dr. Reed. You are young, ambitious. You have $200,000 in student loan debt. You are the sole provider for your mother, who lives in a nursing facility that costs $6,000 a month. You are an excellent doctor, but you are trapped." He laid out the facts of my life as if they were exhibits in a trial. "I am offering you a way out." He walked to the massive oak desk and placed a folder on it. "I will pay off your entire student debt. I will cover your mother's expenses for the rest of her life, in a facility of your choosing. And I will make a donation to your hospital's pediatric ward. $5 million. Enough to fund it for the next decade." The number hung in the air, obscene and unbelievable. $5 million. For what? To be a private physician to an old man. "In return," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "you will work for me. You will live here, on the estate. You'll be on call for my father 24 hours a day. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement so absolute that you will forget you ever knew our names. You will speak to no one about what you see or hear within these walls. Your life, as you know it, will be over. You will belong to me. Belong to me. The words were a cold hand closing around my heart. This was not a job. It was a gilded cage. He was buying me my skills, my silence, my life. I should have said no. I should have turned and walked out that door. Consequences be damned. But I thought of the children in the pediatric ward, of the equipment we could not afford, the treatments we had to delay. I thought of my mother, her mind fading, her body frail, in a clean but understaffed home. He was right. I was trapped. He was just offering a different kind of prison. I will need to see your father, I said, my voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. I need to review his charts before I can agree to anything. Lorenzo Moretti did not smile. He did not look relieved. He simply nodded, as if my answer had been a foregone conclusion. Of course, doctor. Let me show you to your patient. As I followed him out of the study and up the grand, curving staircase, I knew I had just made a deal with the devil. But I told myself it was for the greater good. It was a lie, and a part of me already knew it. The debt from the gala was not paid. It was just the beginning of a much larger one I might never escape. Antonio Moretti was a ghost rattling around in the shell of a once powerful man. He was propped up in a large bed in a cavernous room that smelled of stale air and medication. His eyes, faded versions of his son's, were cloudy with confusion. He had advanced Parkinson's, complicated by heart failure. He was dying, and no amount of money or private care was going to stop it. My job was not to save him. It was to manage his decline in silence. Lorenzo stood by the door as I conducted my examination, his presence a constant, unnerving pressure at my back. He watched my hands as I checked his father's pulse, as I listened to his lungs. He was not just watching a doctor at work. He was watching a tool he had just purchased, assessing its quality. Living in that house was like living underwater. Sounds were muted, movements were slow. Servants moved like ghosts through the hallways. Isabella was a venomous phantom, appearing at meals to cast poisonous glares in my direction, her silence more unnerving than her shouting had been. She and Lorenzo orbited each other like two dead stars, a universe of cold fury between them. My life was reduced to a single hallway, the path from my room to Antonio's. I ate my meals on a tray, I read medical journals, and I waited. The only break in the monotony was Lorenzo. He would appear in his father's room at odd hours, sometimes sitting in a chair in the corner for an hour without saying a word, simply watching the old man sleep. In those moments, I saw a flicker of something else beneath the cold control. A deep, weary grief. A son watching his father fade into nothing. It was the first crack I had seen in his armor. The real world intruded 3 weeks into my gilded imprisonment. It came in the form of a man named Marco, one of Lorenzo's capos, carried through a side door late one night by 2 other men. He was bleeding from a gunshot wound to his abdomen. They laid him on the kitchen island, the cold steel instantly smeared with blood. "Get her," Lorenzo commanded, his voice tight with a cold fury I had not heard before. I was brought down in my pajamas, my medical bag in hand. The scene was surreal. 3 men in expensive suits, one of them dying on a countertop meant for preparing food. The air was thick with the coppery smell of blood and fear. "Call an ambulance," I said automatically, my training kicking in. "He needs a surgeon, a proper operating room." "No hospitals," Lorenzo said, his voice absolute. "No police. You will handle this. Here.
Now."
My heart hammered against my ribs. "I can't. I'm not equipped. It's against the law. It's against my oath." Lorenzo stepped into my space, his large frame blocking out the rest of the room. He looked down at me, his eyes black pits. "Your oath is to me now, doctor. You save him, or you will have broken our agreement." He was not just threatening my job. He was threatening everything he had given me. My mother's care, the hospital's funding, my life. It was a choice, but it was the illusion of one. I could let this man die, or I could cross a line from which I could never return. Therefore, I took a deep breath, pushing past him. Boil some water. Get me towels, thread, and your best whiskey. And someone find me a better light. For the next 2 hours, the gleaming, sterile kitchen became my operating theater. I worked with a focused intensity, blocking out everything but the wound in front of me. I probed for the bullet, clamped bleeders, and stitched muscle and skin back together. It was brutal, primitive surgery. Lorenzo stood beside me the entire time, not flinching, handing me instruments I pointed to, his presence a steady, grounding force in the chaos. Our fingers brushed more than once as he passed me a hemostat or a needle. Each touch was a small electric shock, a spark of connection in the midst of blood and death. He watched my hands, covered in his man's blood, moving with a sureness and confidence that seemed to fascinate him. He was a man who controlled everything with force and intimidation. I controlled this life with knowledge and a steady hand. In that moment, we were not employer and employee. We were two people fighting against the same darkness.
Marco lived.
When it was over, I slumped against a counter, my body shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion. Lorenzo dismissed the other men. He walked over to the sink, wet a clean towel, and came back to me. He gently took my bloody hands in his and began to wipe them clean. His touch was surprisingly soft. "You did well," he said, his voice a low murmur. I looked up at him, at his dark, unreadable eyes. I just became an accessory to a crime. "You saved a life," he corrected. "My life. That man is loyal to me. His life is my life." He finished cleaning my hands and then, for a fraction of a second, his thumb stroked the inside of my wrist. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it was the most intimate touch I had ever felt. "You are more valuable than I realized, Evelyn." He said my name, not Dr. Reed. Evelyn. And the way he said it, low and possessive, sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. It was something far more dangerous. The lines began to blur after that night. My role was no longer just Antonio's doctor. I was Lorenzo's doctor, the family's doctor. I stitched knife wounds, set broken fingers, and dispensed antibiotics for infections that could not be explained to a regular physician. Each act pulled me deeper into his world, erasing more of the woman I used to be. Dr. Evelyn Reed was fading. In her place was someone else, someone who could look at a gunshot wound without flinching, who could lie to her own reflection in the mirror. The Falcons, the rival family, grew bolder. They knew Antonio Moretti was fading, and they sensed weakness. They started testing the boundaries of Lorenzo's territory, and they started looking for the source of his new confidence. They started looking for me. It began subtly. A car that seemed to be on my tail the one time I was allowed to drive into town for supplies. A man asking questions about a new doctor at the local pharmacy. Then, one afternoon, I returned to my room to find it had been searched. Not violently.
Surgically.
My books were out of order, a drawer slightly ajar. It was a message. "We know who you are. We can get to you." That night, Lorenzo moved me to a suite of rooms adjoining his own. "For your protection," he said. The explanation was practical, but the implication was possessive. The gilded cage had shrunk to a single room with a connecting door. Isabella's hatred, which had been simmering at a low boil, erupted. She confronted me in the hallway, her face twisted with rage and a pathetic desperation. "You think you're special," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You think you're different from me? I was an outsider once, too. He bought me just like he bought you. He'll keep you until you're no longer useful, or until he gets bored. Then he will discard you." "This is a professional arrangement," I said, my voice cold. She laughed, a sharp, broken sound. "You think so? You think he looks at you and sees a doctor? He looks at you and sees a possession. Something clean he can own. But this world, his world, it taints everything it touches. Soon, you'll be just as dirty as the rest of us." Her words burrowed under my skin, because I feared they were true. I was changing. The moral lines I once saw so clearly were now hopelessly smudged. Later that night, unable to sleep, I found Lorenzo in the library, staring into the cold fireplace. The house was silent around us. "She's right, isn't she?" I said softly from the doorway. He turned, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "About what?" "This world. It ruins everyone." He was silent for a long moment. "It doesn't ruin. It reveals what was already there." He walked towards me, stopping just inches away. I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. "The Falcons see you now. They think you are my weakness." My breath caught in my throat. "They are wrong," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a raw, honest thing I had never heard from him before. "You are the only thing in this house that is not broken." It was not a declaration of love. It was something far more potent, a confession of need, a statement of fact. In his world of betrayal and decay, I was the one thing he trusted, the one thing he saw as whole. It was the most dangerous admission he could possibly make. And it was the moment I knew I was lost. But Isabella, stewing in her own paranoid jealousy, saw only a rival solidifying her position. She saw me not as a doctor, but as her replacement. And in a final, desperate act of self-preservation, she did the one thing that would guarantee the destruction of everyone around her. She picked up the phone. She made a call to the Falcone family, whispering a piece of information she thought would only clip Lorenzo's wings, something that would make him vulnerable and force him to turn back to her. She told them the route he was taking to a secret meeting the next day, a meeting he was taking me to. The ambush was brutally efficient. A truck blocked the road, and 2 sedans boxed us in. The world erupted in a storm of shattering glass and screeching metal. Our car swerved, hitting a tree with a bone-jarring impact. My head slammed against the window, and for a moment, the world went black. I came to, smelling gasoline and gunpowder. Lorenzo was slumped against the steering wheel, a dark stain spreading across his white shirt from a wound in his side. In the back, Marco, who had been driving, was unmoving. The men from the other cars, members of the Falcone family, were advancing, their guns raised. Panic was a cold, screaming thing in my throat. But then my training took over. I was a doctor. This was a trauma scene. I checked Lorenzo's pulse. It was thready but there. He was bleeding too fast. He would be dead in minutes. I looked at the advancing men. They were not rushing. They were savoring it. My mind raced. I fumbled for my medical bag on the floor, my hands shaking. Syringes,
Gauze,
a scalpel, and a vial of epinephrine. A massive dose, injected directly into the heart, could restart it. A massive dose, injected into the carotid artery of a healthy man, would send him into catastrophic cardiac arrest. It was a monstrous thought, a violation of everything I had ever believed. But Lorenzo's words echoed in my head. This world reveals what was already there. One of the men ripped my door open and hauled me out of the car. He had a cruel, sneering face. "The boss wants the doctor alive," he grunted to his companion. "She's his new pet." He shoved me towards the back of the car. As I stumbled, I palmed the syringe, uncapping it with my thumb. "He's dying," I said, my voice shaking, but I pitched it with panic, not calculation. "Let me help him. Please." The man laughed. "He's dead already. We just get to watch." He was close enough now. I could smell the stale cigarette smoke on his clothes. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged, not away from him, but towards him. I drove the needle deep into the side of his neck, into the pulsing artery, and depressed the plunger. His eyes widened in shock. He gasped, clawing at his throat, then his chest. A look of pure terror crossed his face as his own heart betrayed him. He staggered back, collapsing to the ground, his body convulsing. His partner stared, frozen in disbelief. That hesitation was all the backup Lorenzo's men, arriving in a screeching wave of black cars, needed. The gunfight was short and brutally final. In the silence that followed, I scrambled back to Lorenzo. I ripped open his shirt, pressing gauze from my kit against the wound. "Put pressure here," I commanded one of his men. I worked frantically, my hands moving with a life of their own, fighting to keep him here, to keep him breathing. We got him back to the estate. I spent the next 12 hours fighting for his life on that same kitchen island where I had saved Marco. I removed the bullet, repaired the damage, and pumped him full of fluids and antibiotics. I did not sleep. I did not eat. I did not stop until his fever broke and his breathing steadied. When he finally woke, I was sitting in a chair by his bed, exhausted and covered in his dried blood. He looked at me, his eyes clear and sharp. "Isabella," he said. It was his only question. "She made a call," I said, my voice hollow. "They knew the route." He nodded slowly, a universe of cold calculation in that simple movement. He closed his eyes. I knew I would never see Isabella Moretti again. The thought did not scare me. It did not even register. A few days later, Lorenzo was on his feet, moving stiffly, but with his power undiminished. He found me in the library, looking out the window at the manicured grounds. My old life, my job at the hospital, my small apartment, it all felt like it had belonged to someone else a lifetime ago. I was a ghost now, tied to this violent, beautiful house. "It is done," he said from behind me. "The Falcones have paid their debt. The betrayal from within has been cleansed." He did not need to elaborate. I knew what cleansing meant in his world. He came to stand beside me. For a long time, we just stood in silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of blood and gold. "You cannot go back," he said. It was not a threat, but a statement of fact. "Your name is known. Your face is known. To them, you are mine." I turned to look at him. His face was bruised, his arm was in a sling, but he had never looked more powerful. He was a king in a kingdom of shadows, and he was offering me a throne beside him, a throne that came with a crown of thorns. He did not ask me to stay. He did not offer promises of love or a future. He simply stood there, waiting for my choice. He had shown me his world in all its brutality and all its strange, fierce loyalty. He had shown me himself. I thought of the man collapsing at my feet, the syringe in my hand. I had taken a life to save his. The line had not just been crossed. It had been erased. Dr. Evelyn Reed was well and truly gone. I did not answer him with words. I walked to the decanter on the nearby table, the crystal catching the last of the light. I poured 2 glasses of amber whiskey. I turned and handed one to him. Our fingers brushed, and this time, the electricity was a familiar current. I held his gaze, my hand perfectly steady. In this world, nothing was given. Everything was taken or earned. And I had earned my place here. The debt was finally paid.